Hello.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Christine. I am the head of strategic initiatives at the Aquatic Life Institute. I'd like to welcome you all to the first panel of our final day of the conference. Today's theme is on sustainability, conservation, and food systems intersectionality. And I am personally very excited for all of today's panels, but especially this one, on how ocean conservation and aquatic animal welfare advocates can better collaborate together, which is a topic that is dear to my heart and very relevant to what I do at ALI. So a few housekeeping reminders. The audience is muted upon entry with audio and video off. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will take them afterwards at the end. Every session is being recorded on streamed live on Facebook, and we expect respectful and productive discussions and have no tolerance for harassment or discrimination of any kind. This session is 50 minutes long, and the format is slightly different from what we've been doing these past 3 days. It'll be an interview style panel followed by audience Q&A, which should be really interesting. And now I would like to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Harry Eckman, who is an international animal welfare specialist with over 20 years of experience and is the CEO of the World Cetacean Alliance, the world's largest marine conservation partnership. Then we have Andrea Richey, who has lived in Hong Kong for the past 30 years and worked for a wide variety of corporate and NGO entities. She is the executive director of the Hong Kong Shark Foundation, raising awareness about shark conservation and educating people to stop eating shark fin soup and all shark products. And then we have Lakshmi Venkataram, who is a campaign manager in policy and research at the Humane Society International, India. In 2021, earlier this year, she led India's first roundtable on sustainable aquaculture and fish welfare. So welcome all panelists. As you all know, at ALI, we believe that to have healthy oceans, we need healthy aquatic animals. And yet what we've seen is that ocean conservation and aquatic animal welfare advocacy has been largely siloed. And I speak from personal experience, having come from the marine conservation world, but it's starting to change a bit more now. And I think that on the first day, having Dr. Sylvia Earle provide the keynote speech was a huge catalyst for our movement and speaks to this slight change. So my first question to all of you is, could you tell us about how you are collaborating with ocean conservation and or aquatic animal welfare advocates in your own work? We will start with, I think, Harry.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel with Andrea and Lakshmi. At the WCA, we straddle both of those issues. We straddle welfare and conservation, and we'll be talking about this, I guess, through this entire session. But to give you an example of the two areas that would give examples of work that we do in those two areas, from a welfare point of view, we run a responsible whale watching certification program. So we work with partners and whale watching companies around the world and provide certification to make sure that the standards of responsible whale watching are raised and we can ensure the welfare of every animal that's encountered. On the conservation side, we run a project actually in Sussex, where our office is based, which is to do with kelp forest reforestation. And that's, about protecting habitats and the ecosystem and the food sources that the whales and dolphins and obviously countless other species rely on in order to thrive. And so it's about finding projects across our program areas that look at both of those things, looking at the welfare, but looking at the conservation as well, and looking at where those things intersect.
That's great. Very interesting. I'm sure we'll want to know more about your certification program for responsible whale watching later. Andrea, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, thanks. Well, thanks for having me today, Christine, and great to be here with Harry and Lakshmi. Well, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Shark Foundation is really about 5 words: raising awareness about shark conservation. And we're the only ones that are focusing only on sharks. And so for us to collaborate, we work with ocean conservation and animal welfare organizations, but collaborating with big NGOs to me is great because they have staff and they have bigger audiences, and a bigger budget. But frankly, we prefer to work with small NGOs because, well, we can make decisions, they can make decisions quicker. And in the past, we've worked with some big NGOs and done things like shark-free wedding campaigns or shark-free restaurant pledges on an international level. Or showing documentaries like Rob Stewart's Shark Water. We worked with some other organizations and showed that. But when management changes, collaborations seem to fade away a lot of times, and it changes with the leadership. So I really prefer working mostly with small NGOs on things like breakfasts or fairs. We'll share a table at a fair even to get double exposure. We'll have joint beach cleanups. We'll do things like joint talks where 2 or 3 NGOs will get together and we'll go in and we'll speak about ocean and animal conservation. And so, I think you just have to get creative. And we've probably worked with a lot of big names, but I still think working with smaller organizations works for us because we're really small, works a lot better. And I feel we can get more traction from that.
Okay. Very interesting. I think you and Lakshmi are one of the only participants from Asia. So I think the audience might want to hear more about your experience there too later. Lakshmi, go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Christine, for inviting me to this, and very happy to be here with Andrea and Harry. Yeah, I work for Humane Society International India, and the issue of fish welfare has actually not, or aquatic animal welfare hasn't yet become a big issue or an issue. And we've just started actually this work in this domain. And one of our partnerships has actually been with Fish Welfare Initiative that you may know is focused only on fish welfare in India. I think that's a very exciting partnership, according to me, because they have the expertise on this particular subject matter, whereas HSI hasn't yet, I think, developed specialized expertise in fish welfare. So we're turning to them for research and even on-ground expertise that we don't have currently. So that's definitely one partnership we're exploring in this area. Also, we've started speaking to environment groups that haven't yet explored interest in, the sustainability aspect of, aquaculture or fish farming. And they're slowly starting to see that this is an issue from a public health standpoint, but it hasn't yet become a big environmental angle in India. I think like farmer livelihoods and those kinds of issues that are also associated with fish farming are definitely more important for stakeholders at the moment. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Lakshmi. I think that segues well into our next question, which is about, some of the biggest issues that we're facing as a movement, for both conservation organizations, more aligned with what Harry does, and then for aquatic animal welfare advocacy groups and animal advocacy groups in general, such as, Andrea's group and also HSI. So maybe Harry, would you like to start first on what do you think are the biggest issues facing us as a movement?
Sure, Chris. This is actually a really interesting question, and I kind of given it quite a lot of thought because my background is primarily in welfare. And actually, it's only more recently that it's been in aquatic welfare, and so that transition into conservation over the last few years, I've noticed some key differences and some challenges between those two areas. And I think it's a difference of perspective within the sector, but also kind of the public's maybe perception of the difference between conservation and welfare. And I think that sometimes conservation, as in a sector, thinks of wildlife and animals in terms of, for want of a better word, a resource. So a population or an ecosystem that needs to be conserved or preserved or managed, whereas welfare has a tendency to see beyond that and look at the intrinsic value of an individual animal and its welfare and its sentience. And so sometimes it's this conflict between pragmatism and passion that those two kind of areas work on. Although there really shouldn't be any conflict there, because ultimately we're kind of working towards the same thing. And the approach with conservation, I think, is often very much about looking at the status quo. So how can we stop things getting worse than they are, or how can we manage this situation sustainably? Whereas welfare tends to be a little, in my opinion, it tends to be sometimes a little bit more ambitious. How do we make things better? How do we reduce suffering? And these things are so inextricably linked and so interdependent that I think there's much more opportunities for conservation and welfare to work together than perhaps they have in the past.
Great, thank you so much. I agree. I think a difference in perspective is one of the biggest challenges. Like I said, I come from a fisheries background. We never really talked about reducing fish suffering. And whereas from this sector, we don't think about the animals as in stocks to be managed. We'd love to brainstorm, possibly if we have time at the end, to see ways we can kind of merge these two perspectives going forward. Andrea, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, the biggest issues I think that we deal with is too little change too late. That for me, that's just, the fear of just the animal that we represent becoming extinct. There's over 500 species of shark in the world. But in Hong Kong, for example, under CITES, United Nations CITES, there's only 12 that are protected under law. So shark finning, for example, is not illegal in Hong Kong and in many parts of the world. It's only those few that are near extinction. And so I do find working with ocean conservation groups a lot easier than with animal welfare groups, because a lot of times, especially if it's fish related, there's that sort of, it's okay to eat sustainable fish. And we kind of have a problem with that, because at Hong Kong Shark Foundation, we don't believe there's such a thing as sustainable fishing. Because people feel that there are plenty of certain species of shark that are out there, and they can, we can eat them today or fish them today, but tomorrow there aren't going to be that many of it. And then, so really for us, the solution is zero tolerance. So the biggest issue is, the extinction of the species and that cataclysmic disruption to the delicate marine ecosystem. So how do we work with organizations? So if you want to work with like Jill Robinson from Animals Asia or like Humane Society, they're really not focusing on aquatic animals very much. So we find it easier to work with ocean conservation groups a lot of times. And then that is a nice sort of fit together, because we're not kind of trampling on their area and they're not trampling on our area so much. So that's where it sort of yin yang kind of fits together. But really the biggest issue that we're facing is funding. And funding, I think, is really difficult for us. As a movement, trying to justify that these issues that like Aquatic Life Institute are looking at, or that, Humane or Shark Foundation, whatever it is, if it's too narrow, it's harder to get traction and it's really hard to get funding. So funding is definitely, we can't forget about that. To me, that's just always paramount. If you're a big, huge organization like Greenpeace or WWF, you have so many different revenue streams. And for smaller organizations, that is just realistically, that is one of the biggest issues that we deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I totally agree. Funding for smaller organizations always an issue, and an extinction of apex predators. Really, yeah, really challenging, and a huge issue for us all. Lakshmi, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge in my eyes is environmental in nature, meaning to say that the stage of progress that India is at currently, as a poor or developing country, I think just the priorities of policymakers, priorities of the public are not conducive to quick change for animals, and within that farm animals, and within that marine animals. So I think I would say it's very low on the priority list. I mean, I know how difficult it has been for us to even do chicken welfare work in India, approaching policymakers. I mean, when you say chicken welfare, it's like, it's because it's the concern more there is about the farmer and the producers, and all, which are also valid concerns. So I think finding, ways to integrate animal welfare with important human welfare issues is just the biggest challenge. We're seeing some progress here and there, but I don't think the scale of the progress is where it should be for meaningful progress for animals to happen.
Yeah, and India is one of the countries that has pretty good welfare,
on paper, yeah.
on paper.
Enforcement is actually a very huge. It's almost like if you have a law, it's good on paper.
Yeah.
There's no way to really.
Yeah, and I guess maybe COVID has kind of exacerbated that challenge a little, even more, because in many countries it's human welfare now first, and yeah, that's putting animals kind of at the back burner again. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, well, on a lighter note, can you share with us on some benefits of working together, or any success stories that you can share with us in your experience? Maybe Harry, you can start.
Sure. Well, working in partnership or in collaboration is at the core of the WCA. We're an alliance of partners. So from the very beginning, it's been about working together with different partners, whether that's in welfare or conservation or academia or local businesses or tourism. So it's really at the heart of what we do. And it's so important, where there's collaboration, there's hope, there's a shared sense of purpose. So, working together in that way is vital for us. There's a couple of programs that we work on that I think really illustrate success in working in partnership. The first one is our Whale Heritage Site program, which is where we identify destinations around the world that more than just as places to go and see whales, that is being done, responsibly. This is a community initiative that kind of shows the community themselves championing their heritage, their culture, their art, their history, their relationship with whales and cetaceans and with the ocean environment. And we have 5 of these locations around the world, 5 of these heritage sites. And so the group of stakeholders that is locally based that actually developed this program, and we help facilitate the process, really shows the power of working together with different partners and representation from within a community. The other thing that we do is a program we're actually launching next week, which is our Bycatch campaign. And, you know, we're not the first organization and won't be the last to talk about this, but it's kind of personal to us because what we're seeing on the Sussex coast where our office is dolphins washing up on the shore when we have these super trawlers coming and fishing in the English Channel. And so our campaign is about the dolphins, the effect that it's having in cetaceans, but we're well aware that it affects every other species and that bycatch is a huge, huge issue. And we're actually working with the local fishing industry, so the local inshore fishermen who you know, tend to be in boats 10 meters long as opposed to these super trawlers that are 120, 140 meter long factory ships. And the local fishermen are being absolutely devastated. The fish stocks are being devastated. The impact it's having on animals is devastating, and the local industry itself is suffering. And so they're very in favor of us addressing this so that they can do a far better job of managing the marine environment, which they have a pretty good understanding of.
That's amazing. I'm really interested in hearing more about that campaign later if we have time. And Andrea, do you have anything to say about any success stories or benefits of working together?
Sure. Well, I'd like to talk about the benefits of working together, and then I'll share one specific success story. You know, I think working together, you're stronger. You're, you know, especially if you're a smaller organization and you're trying to get some message across or change cognitive behavior or whatever, you know, together you can be stronger. And so there's just safety in numbers kind of thought. You get a bigger audience too. You can, you know, think about throwing your net out there. You throw your net out, and a small net versus a big net, you can get more fish, so to speak, right? And then that's the great thing with partnering up in the past with Wild Aid and WWF. You know, they have pretty big network, and so we were able to tap into that. You know, there are cons to that too, right? Because some of the cons are you can get sidelined. There are egos involved. You can have people saying that, you know, well, we did all the work and, you know, you didn't do any of the work. So it can be very political. So you have to choose your partners kind of carefully and your campaigns carefully too. But some of the tips that goes with the benefits, you know, is that choosing network partners that are kind of in line with what you want to accomplish. So if it's an ocean conservation group, then, you know, if it segues nicely with them because you're talking about sharks, or if you are a vegan, we tend to do a lot of stuff with vegan organizations, you know, because we're advocating not eating sharks and not eating any fish, right? So we get together and we'll do fairs. We'll do speaking engagements, we'll be on panels. And so we're going out trying to look for other organizations that are in line with our mission and our goal, which is to raise awareness about shark conservation. But one success in Hong Kong was we partnered up with Wild Aid, and we did a public service announcement and did a video a few years ago, and that worked really well. We partnered up with WWF on action campaign, and that worked pretty well. And recently we worked with about 32 NGOs to try to change the law in Hong Kong. And we actually were able to support a new law, which is Cap 455. And that in Hong Kong says that no longer are sharks, of the 12 sharks that are protected, no longer are those sharks just protected under the law for endangered animals. Now, under the Organized and Serious Crimes Ordinance, sharks can be also protected, and so can pangolins and tigers and, you know, any animals that are considered to be endangered. Now, sharks can also, those 12 sharks under the law can now be protected and seen as an organized part of organized crime. Well, what that means for the law then is that they can go out and they can actually go after the money in the paper trail. whereas under the protection of endangered species law, it was only Customs and the Agriculture and Fisheries Conservation Department. They were the only arm of the law that were allowed to basically arrest people, and that makes it quite difficult. Now we have another body. Basically, we have the police that can come in and get people for crime. And, that's along with, human trafficking and prostitution and drug trafficking. It's right along there with, because it's just such an expensive, it's a multi-billion US dollar industry in the shark fin business, the shark meat. So finding out which sharks are endangered and therefore protected is difficult, because the only way you can do that is through DNA testing. So we recently teamed up with about 32 other organizations in Hong Kong, and the bill August 18th, 2021. So that's great. Now we just, like Lakshmi was talking about, we have the law, now we have to have the enforcement. So we hope that the government will step up and move to the next level, which is actually hiring enough people to go out there and enforce that law, and there are actually so many organizations that we work with. I just have to show you this. I had to put together sort of a wheel of all the different shark organizations around the world. And I guess my tip on that is, if you're a small organization or even a large organization and you want to collaborate with somebody, just write them. Instagram and actually Clubhouse are two of the ways that I reach out to other organizations and just meet people and just, write to them and say, look, we've got we have an education initiative. I've spoken to 8,000 students so far this year. And, I'm looking for partners. So if anybody out there is looking for an education partner, we're in Hong Kong. We have a great program called the Shark Ambassadors. And so you just reach out and say, look, are you interested? And you'd be surprised. A lot of people will write back and say, yes, let's do something together.
That's amazing. I really agree that we're stronger together, especially for this new movement and for smaller organizations in general. And it's great to hear that you've had traction with big groups like WWF and Wild Aid, and that Clubhouse is one of the ways that you can reach out to other groups and like-minded individuals. I'm sure
Absolutely.
we have a lot to learn from you, as we have several coalitions at ALI as well. And Lakshmi, can you share some benefits or success stories from your end?
Yeah, so I think for me, the primary benefit of partnering with other groups is, I think, along the lines of what Andrea mentioned earlier about yin and yang. I think there are certain strengths that each organization brings to the table, and every organization obviously does not have all the strengths. And so I think it's really nice when groups acknowledge that honestly and say, look, I may not have this particular expertise area, but I know you do. And there's a really nice collaboration that can come from that. It also helps to, I think, delineate responsibilities. Like in a small movement such as ours, it's good to know that, like, for instance, HSI has done a fair amount of policy related work, whereas we haven't done too much, grassroots work with, say, farmers. Whereas fish welfare initiatives, core area of work as of now is working with farmers to create, sustainable, to improve sustainability in fish farming. So it's really nice when we both have come together, because fish welfare work has not fully, become a big thing in India yet. But when we're making a plan jointly, it's nice to know that HSI is thinking of, the policy and regulatory aspects and the work related to that, whereas Fish Welfare Initiative is doing the on-ground work. And now we're talking about, okay, so once corporate work starts for fish welfare in India, how do we do that? Or is there another third party that can come into the picture that would be, good at doing that? So especially in a small movement, I think collaborating with others is vital. And it also helps prevent duplication of work. HSI does not need to do everything, and Fish Welfare Initiative does not need to do everything. And there's like a knowledge repository that we're kind of building on by collaborating, and obviously preventing duplication of work.
Yeah, I love that mindset, rather than in competition, we're all working together and not duplicating our work. That's great. And related to our next question is, to the audience, all three of our panelists are members of our coalition, the Coalition for Aquatic Conservation at ALI. And this is one of the ways to close the gap between ocean conservation advocates and animal welfare advocates. So I'm really happy to have all three of you here talking about this important topic. But other than this coalition, do you know of any other ways that we can close this silo, or any future opportunities that we can engage in? Harry, I'll let you start again.
I mean, I think the key thing is, as we've already said, is partnership. The more coalitions, the more partnerships, and the more ways that we can find of working together, the better, because this is not something that any organization or even small group of organizations is going to be addressed. These challenges that we're facing are momentous. They're huge. And the idea that we can do this individually is just unrealistic. We need to be all working together to face these things. And I mean, the thing is, you have different organizations, not just conservation or environmental or animal welfare, that may have differences of opinion, but even within a particular sector, welfare organizations have different have perspectives on things and different priorities. And I think it's just recognizing that we have far more in common, and we're all trying to achieve the same aim, rather than focusing on the differences that we have between us. As long as you're in principle trying to head the same way, then you can complement each other in different ways and work respectively and supportively of each other. And if there's things where you diverge, well, then so be it, and then you come back together on the thing that you need to work together on. But it's just about being as supportive as possible. I think that's key.
That's a great point. I think we can all take note of that as we, think about ways to collaborate a little more with industry and see how we can focus on the commonalities. No, Andrea, would you like to say something about that?
Well, Harry summed it up perfectly, really. I don't know what else I could really add, except for to go back to that fundraising issue. The pie that we're all going after. I mean, I come from the corporate world, and I thought that was full of sharks. And so, and I come here and I'm saving sharks, and I'm pretty shocked because it seems that we're all sort of going after a very small pie when it comes. And I was in a workshop yesterday, a half-day workshop on fundraising. And, this is really the biggest issue that we have. And if we want to organize with somebody to do fundraising, I don't think it really works so well. It's more if we have campaigns and, we can complement each other, like Harry was saying. But fundraising is still the biggest issue, and that still has to be done alone, and how do we, so for you, for an organization like ALI, AQI, Aquatic Life Institute, ALI, yes. How are you going to get unsiloed? I mean, how are you going to reach out? I think they're going to be, like with organizations like you're talking to today, like doing conferences, you're doing fantastic. This is your second one, and it's just improving and getting better. It's getting the word out there. And then I think those partnerships will come naturally as you move along. So yeah, it's an everyday challenge, that is for sure. But I think together we're stronger, and not everybody can do everything, but everyone can do something. And so we're doing our best.
Definitely. And hopefully in the future, more funding will start to come our way as, more people start to talk about this issue. And
Exactly. And realize, because, you know, a lot of charities especially are really focused on children and poverty and elderly and disabled. And the environment is not really part of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, especially in the corporate world. So when corporates are thinking about supporting issues, especially from an SDG or ESG standpoint, then they're really thinking about, you know, when they're thinking about the environment, they're thinking about, okay, we're not going to have straws in the office anymore. You know, it's pretty tangible, right? So it's harder in the ocean conservation. It's harder to measure it. And so I think that's some of the challenges we have. You know, why are sharks important, for example, and who cares if we eat too many of them? You know, there's plenty of them in the ocean, and it doesn't really matter. But trying to impress upon them how important these creatures are to the whole big picture. And it's I equate it to when you're on an airplane and they say put your mask on first before you put your mask on your child. I think taking care of the ocean and the aquatic life that's there is like putting on your mask first before we talk about the children and the elderly, et cetera. Because if we don't take care of the planet first, right, it's going to be really difficult for us to take care of all the other issues. So yeah, difficult getting out of the silo, but I think there's hope. And I think ALI is doing a great job to bring us all together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's all stay hopeful. And Lakshmi, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think tying into also what Andrea said about, I think as we get better at weaving this issue with human self-interest, I think we will be able to get our message across better. It's easier to care about an issue when you know that you're going to be directly impacted and soon, than it is when, you know, it's something abstract or not even on someone's priority list like fish welfare. So I think there's this tremendous opportunity though. I mean, the good thing about this issue is that it's actually so connected to so many human welfare issues. Perhaps we've just not explored the opportunities to connect them, you know, meaningfully yet. So I think, you know, more creative solutions about how can we actually link animal welfare with human welfare. I think that's the next horizon for animal welfare work, at least in a developing country like India. And Fish Welfare Initiative is actually doing a great job of that because, for instance, they're working with farmers on how to improve, you know, welfare and sustainability of that in their farms. And they're also demonstrating, if I'm not wrong, increased profits for those animals through these methods. And hopefully that will create also a link to, you know, conscious consumer markets. So if that whole link is established, I think that's a great way to show that prosperous farmer, good animal welfare and sustainability go hand in hand and are not, you know, sort of mutually exclusive as they tend to be framed in India today.
Definitely. And I hope more of those examples will arise with, you know, given this new work in both aquaculture and fisheries to show that, you know, welfare and their profit is tied and also better for, you know, human safety, you know, of the crew and their staff. So we have a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm really to see this level of engagement. So I'm going to go straight into their questions. The first one is, does the panel think language is critical in the whale world where welfare and conservation go hand in hand? We fought to stop talking about stocks and talk about populations, and now even individuals. I have always advocated for fish as wildlife in my conversations with government officials. It can help change the dynamic. So again, does the panel think language is critical in the whale world where welfare and conservation go hand in hand?
Absolutely. I think language is vitally important and actually isn't recognized as how important it actually is when we talk about these things. You know, if we're talking about the example there of stocks is it de-animalizes instead of dehumanizes into each individual creature. We talk about harvesting the ocean. When we're talking about the fishing industry or anything else like that, they refer to it in weight rather than the number of lives. If you try and find out the scale of fishing, we're talking 155 billion tons of fish a year, which translates to between 2 and 3 trillion animals. But we don't talk about the animals. It's all done in weight. And in the land-based farming industry, we know the numbers. We know it's 70 to 80 billion farm animals. But the fish, the ocean is still referred to in the wrong way. And for something that seems so remote, as Lakshmi was saying, and Andrea was saying, it seems very distant to most people. And so using language in the right way that creates that connection, I think, is vitally important, possibly more in the marine world than anywhere else.
Thanks, Harry. Lakshmi or Andrea, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. And I actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to tie it to one of the later questions I saw on whether a more scientific or a more humane way of talking about the issue would help. I think in my experience, it's been about knowing your audience. I think that I don't think I can confidently say one particular style of messaging works over another, but definitely knowing what matters to your audience is of prime importance. I think the emotional angle definitely works with certain audiences, but I'm quite confident it won't work with all. And if I'm obviously approaching at the policymaker level, I would say there's just maybe an opening line about the scale of suffering, because some of them actually have connections with animals, and you can see that when you're speaking with them. But I think, again, bringing the factual connection with human suffering, that's a big, that's something that often changes the direction of the conversation. And of course, a whole bunch of scientific or technical literature that supports your argument. So language matters a lot, but I think it is totally audience specific.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Thank you. Andrea, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
Nothing particular.
Okay, well, the next question is actually for you, Andrea. How did you choose to focus your efforts on sharks specifically, and how do you measure shark suffering in terms of numbers?
Wait, I'm reading a different question. How does shark suffering compare to farm animals? Sorry, what was your question? Can you say that again? Because I was reading a different question, I guess.
You can answer either one. Mine was very similar. How did you choose to focus your efforts on sharks specifically, and how do you measure their suffering? Right.
Well, I chose sharks because I was working in the corporate world, and I started to do some volunteering and giving back in 2015. And I was volunteering. One of the organizations was Hong Kong Shark Foundation. I didn't start it. It was started in 2008 in Hong Kong. And I went to a talk at the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club, and I was so blown away by the numbers. And I realized that I had been negligently contributing to the destruction of the species by eating things like shark fin soup. And how is it I was kind of educated and was not aware of this? And I just felt we needed to make more people aware of this issue. Marine biologists estimate that around 100 million sharks are killed every year for their fins. But one marine biologist who, Diego Cardenosa, who was actually in shark water extinction, he told me a couple of years ago that it was more like 270 million sharks are killed every year, because now it's just not for fins. It's for fish and chips in the UK. 10 out of 10 fish and chip shops in London are serving shark, because the cod market, it was so that when I started selling shark meat. to the fish and chip shops. In the UK, in Australia, it's called flake, and in New Zealand, it's called lemon fish. And they just give them fake names, and they say, it's a fish, but in fact, it's shark. So the consumer being more, educated about it, which is what we do. I mean, I'm trying to educate people. I'm a farmer, and I'm educating people and planting those seeds every day that I talk to people. And so, that's how I got into it, because I was so shocked. And the suffering, the question about suffering is suffering. I don't think if it's suffering of a shark or of a fish, they're all sentient beings. And, as full disclosure, I'm a vegan. So to me, killing any animal to eat is just wrong. So I think there shouldn't be any suffering. And I don't think you can, I don't believe in that argument that you can kill kindly, right? Or humanely. That just doesn't, that's an oxymoronic term to me. So, without getting into that esoteric sort of area, I just think suffering is suffering, and we have to just, we have to all work a little harder to stop that. And the work that organizations all over the world are doing, is very important. And we're all doing our little part, I think. And I'm happy to be in this conservation area.
Well said. Suffering is suffering. That is correct. Thank you for that, Andrea. Our next question is for Harry. Could you talk a little bit more about the kelp whale project that you have in Sussex? Harry?
Would help if I unmuted myself there. Just briefly, it's run through our Sussex Dolphin project. So it's a locally based project. Along the Sussex coast, which is along the south coast of England, there used to be 40 kilometers of kelp forest that, was vital for the ecosystem and habitat and feeding grounds and nursing grounds for all kinds of species. And through trawling methods and storm damage and dumping of sediment and things like that, this disappeared. And so now we're working with the local community. We're working with the coastal community, and we're working with the local municipalities in the restoration of a stretch of kelp forest. So we're rewilding, and we're hoping to build up those kelp beds again to be able to bring back a natural habitat, which will help the ecosystem. And ultimately, sort of like the better the ecosystem and the better the habitat, then that obviously goes to support cetaceans as well, which is obviously our main focus area. But we're recognizing the connection between all of these things.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Next question for Lakshmi. Do you think educating fishermen about the importance of following sustainable fishing will create an impact on conservation of the marine environment?
Yeah, I think so, but it's also quite early to say, I think. In the few farms that this has been done in India, farmers seem to be really receptive to changing their way of doing farming, as long as they're obviously supported along the way with the financial and technical assistance they may need for transitions. We've certainly seen a lot of farmer interest on a similar side on the chicken welfare issue, for instance, in India, like the whole transition to cage free. So I think there is potential. It's, I think, a little early to say the size of that potential. And I'm excited about that area, because I think it's a great, like I said, I'm just a fan of this way of doing work, because I think it can get the attention to this neglected issue much faster. So I'm definitely putting my money on this way of doing work.
Great. We are just running a little bit over time, but one last question. I think this is for everyone. How do you use for your work in terms of social media, apart from reaching out to other groups? Can you share any insights on what has worked? Lakshmi, do you want to go first?
I think again, this is a question of knowing your audience. I think targeted posts work, but again, you have to really know who you're targeting to and what their interests are. And I think it's a great opportunity to actually realize, to actually study what the the interests of your audience are. For instance, there is I think from an animal welfare organization standpoint, there's an intuitive desire for a certain kind of messaging naturally, as an environmental group would have a certain kind of messaging. I think the trick in my eyes is to consciously move past that intuitive way of looking at this and actually see what kind of posts are doing well. Maybe it has nothing to do with animal welfare. For instance, I know our food related posts do really well. Plant-based alternatives or just food, because people are interested in food. Again, it's a self-interest thing. Whereas when we're talking about an issue that, that's perhaps making people guilty, even if we're not doing it to make people guilty, or we're doing it in a, in a different kind of way, I think more social media around things that people are interested about, which is like new and interesting food. That's just one of the creative ways I think that work.
Great, thank you. Andrea or Harry, anything to add?
Well, I'd like to make a comment back on Vignesh's question, which just got taken off the screen, about the educating fishermen about the importance of following sustainable fishing. Will it create an impact on conservation? Yes is the small answer, but the big answer is no, because you should watch Seaspiracy. And Seaspiracy is all about commercial fishing, right? And it's not the little local, indigenous fishermen that are really creating the problem. For us, the problem is overfishing, right? Sharks are getting caught in bycatch. So it's really it's the commercial fishing business that's subsidized by governments that we really need to educate. The ones that are they're the ones making the biggest damage. And I guess in the movie, the documentary Racing Extinction, if anybody saw that, they took some Indonesian local people, and instead of killing the rays, they turned it into diving, and they turned it into an ecotourism. And so to me, that would be that kind of education and that kind of enlightenment would be much more productive for everyone versus just trying to reach out and teach some second grade, people in Somali why they shouldn't catch sharks. And I just think that's not the best use of our time. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you. And Harry, any last words?
Yeah, I think just picking up on some of the comments before, I think that, considering the human element in all of this is vital, picking up on Lakshmi's point about knowing your audience, but also it's, similar to what Andrea was saying, human behavior change and, the principles of changing attitudes and behaviors, whether that's looking at alternative livelihoods or transitioning into other ways of doing things or other practices, is kind of vital. We talk about conservation and we talk about animal welfare, and we see them as sometimes separate from people. It's like, how do we solve this problem with the animals or with the rainforest or with the ocean? But it's all down to us. And so ultimately, it always comes back to people and the way we engage with people and the solutions that we can find to do that. And I think that's where we sometimes lose focus. And having data on that, I think, is vitally important. I think we need to work more closely with academia as well to be able to have the research and the data and the information to support all of this.
Great closing statement. We are a little bit over time, so unfortunately we didn't get to all the questions, but we do have a workshop later today on this topic at 2:45 Eastern, so anybody can join and we can continue the discussion there. I want to thank all three panelists so much for your time and this really fascinating discussion, and for audience members for for engaging so much and for joining. So our next session is on how to work with the food industry on improving aquatic animal welfare, which starts in 5 minutes. So thank you all so much, and I will see you in 5 minutes.